So without further ado, I will turn it over to Cory.
Excellent. Good evening. Thank you for having us here on behalf of Nick, myself, Minnesota DNR. We appreciate the invitation. TU has always been a strong, staunch supporter of fisheries work, not only up on Lake Superior and in the Duluth area, but around the state and around the nation. I just want to come tonight and just give you a little intro into our office. We are the Lake Superior office. We run from Duluth to the Grand Portage Reservation Zone border on Lake Superior. We're a fairly light office. We have 2 full-time technicians, 3 full-time biologists, and myself. Our biologists are kind of broken out into their own job duties. We have Nick, obviously, with our tributaries leading into Lake Superior, working with migratory fishes. We have Josh Blankenheim, who does all of the Lake Superior large lake, mostly lake trout sampling. Nate Beckman, he's running our aging and our diets program, and myself, who get to herd cats all year, which is great. You know, a lot of our work, like I said, has been rehabilitating lake trout since sea lamprey invaded in the 50s. That's been 65 plus years. We're there. We finally rehabilitate lake trout populations, which is great. Through that time, that's allowed us to focus on other species, including brook trout, steelhead, walleye, lake sturgeon. So tonight, Nick's going to present on a lot of the work that we've been doing recently in relation to coastal brook trout. Even though a lot of the information he's presenting is more recent, we have been doing genetics work on brook trout going all the way back to 1997. So we've been working with brook trout for a long time. It's something near and dear to my heart. I grew up in the UP of Michigan, steelhead fishing, brook trout fishing. We didn't have a big boat. We had a 12-foot Sears Roebuck aluminum rowboat. That's what we had. So a lot of our time was spent brook trout fishing and steelhead fishing. What I wanted to talk about mostly was we run our office on a 10-year management plan cycle. That started in 1996. That means 96 was the first one, 06 was the second, 16, and here we are, I can't believe, coming up on 2026. So this coming year, we're going to work on updating our management plan. So we have 25 or so stakeholder groups that make up our advisory group that we meet with and go over all things Lake Superior. And that helps us to draft that management plan going forward. That management plan does things like gives us goals and objectives for brook trout, so it lays out what we're going to do over the next 10 years. At the end of that 10 years, we come back and say, this is what 10 years ago we said we would do. Did we do it? Did we not do it? What were the results? If we didn't do it, why didn't we? Et cetera, et cetera. So it's a really great way for us in this management plan cycle to meet with everybody, get everything, give you a state of Lake Superior, and really set our work that goes forward for the next 10 years. So that's going to be coming up. I know TU's involved. John's been involved since, I think, the beginning. I just want to let everybody know that, you know, that's coming up this year, and we're working on ways that we can reach out to a more broad audience, rather than just our library groups. So, but I think, you know, with all the virtual meetings that we've had in the past 3 or 4 years, I put a poll out to the participants in the last go round, and the majority of people said we would rather have in-person meetings, which is great. I love in-person meetings. So, but we're still going to figure out how to reach out virtually and let a larger group of the public and anglers know. So again, we appreciate the invite down. We're more than happy to come down anytime and talk about whatever you'd like to talk about regarding Lake Superior fisheries. So without further ado, Nick Peterson.
Yeah, it's really... All right, try talking to him.
Yes, yeah.
Get
Hello?
a little higher. Yeah,
Hello?
perfect.
Good.
Okay, this is
Awesome.
advanced, this is retreat, and this is the laser pointer.
Excellent.
A little sensitive. The
Okay.
diesel's over there.
All right. Yeah, like Cory said, thanks for the invite, everybody. I've met some of you in the room, most of you not. Yeah, we'll get past this. Show of hands in the room. Who fishes the north shore of Lake Superior? Who fishes for coastal brook trout on the north shore of Lake Superior? Yeah, not very many. How about steelhead? A lot more. Yeah. So that's kind of the, you know, it's really nice to be able to talk about coastal brook trout because they're just such a special fish to a lot of people. Not to sound real you know, making this thing a human or anything, but it's pretty cool, right? I mean, the history of this fish and this fish being around the North Shore for as long as it has, and undergoing a lot of different things is pretty neat. So today I'm mostly, I want to start with kind of leading off with following up with Cory's intro to our management plan and just kind of give you another look at how we operate within our office. So obviously Lake Superior is a large beast, a lot of water to manage. Us in Minnesota over here, we manage about 8% of it. It's still the largest lake in Minnesota, but we've just got a very little sliver. And our sliver, this is showing pretty much my work area on the North Shore specifically. But it takes a lot of people, takes a lot of coordination and partners to come together to make lake-wide goals for all the species that we manage. Really, we work under the framework of the Great Lakes Fisheries Commission. Just kind of how this works is we've got a Lake Superior committee. Every lake's got a lake committee. That's our representative for the Minnesota DNR is Patrick Schmaltz, who's the head of fisheries research right now. We've got Lake Superior Technical Committee that are underneath of them. We kind of follow the lead on, we provide information to the Lake Committee on the state of Lake Superior. This technical committee is made up of a whole group of people, and you probably can't read that whole list up there, but 30 plus groups, tribes, state agencies, federal agencies, you name it. So the technical committee, which actually Cory is one of the leaders of the whole group. So it's been really great having him in the office to really steer us in the right direction on a lake-wide plan. But within this framework, the state agencies and tribes still maintain management authority of our 8%. So we still have the ability to manage for species here as long as it doesn't negatively impact everywhere else. And so that's kind of how it's all broken out. We're all obligated to, all the people on this list are obligated to what's called the Joint Strategic Plan. It's basically just a document that says we're not going to do anything that negatively impacts Wisconsin or Michigan or Ontario. So over time, we've had management goals for brook trout. These are our lake-wide management goal for brook trout currently. These were set up, back in the, what was it, Cory, 2000s, 90s, 2000s? Early 2000s. So all the people from around the lake came together, created a lake-wide brook trout management plan, came up with the goal of maintaining widely distributed self-sustaining populations in as many of the original native habitats as practical. The hardest part about these fish is they've been around so long. Where were they native to and where were they not? So there's a lot of, and moving on, the progress to reach this goal by evidence of increasing abundance and range and successful establishment of these fish in areas that contain sufficient habitat or existing or restored habitats. So what the heck is a coaster? If that doesn't get you excited, you're in the wrong place. All right. So that fish was caught last fall on a North Shore stream. I won't tell you exactly which one, but yeah, giant brook trout. So they are a brook trout. They're no different than the stream resident trout. They just do something different. They're the only native stream salmonid to Lake Superior. So everything else, brown trout, salmon, all the different salmon have been introduced at some point. Depending on who you talk to, you get different definitions of what is a coaster, what constitutes a brook trout being a coaster brook trout. Talk to a lot of anglers, not every angler, but a lot of anglers, it's like, oh, it's got to be 14 inches, 16 inches, 20 inches, right? It's kind of size based. So that's true. By and large, these fish are a little bit larger because they use the big lake, get bigger. Biologist standpoint, we accept that they get a little bit bigger by using the lake, but they also got this different thing that they do. They don't stay in the river and become a resident. They migrate to the big lake, right? They do something different. And then genetics, there's been a lot of genetics research on these fish over the years, and they haven't been able to find anything that makes them unique compared to a a stream resident brook trout. So there's a big push to make this like an ESA enlisted threatened species with the feds, and it didn't go anywhere because by and large, the genetics came back to say there's not much different, they just do something different. So really the way that I think is the best to define this is migratory life history variant of a stream resident brook trout. It inhabits Lake Superior at some stage of its life. So some people would throw a size in there. I'll show you some of the research we've been doing to kind of break that down a little bit and see if that is actually the case. I want to start with a few boring slides for some people it might not be. The history of coasters is fascinating. If you ever get a chance, just dig your nose in some of the old historic, what do you call them, Judas Priest? What do you, Jesuit Priest articles, and you'll find a lot of really, well, cool ways of writing, number one, on, they just wrote differently back then on things, but anyways, I threw in here, going back as far as I could find. I threw this first one in here because how many people in here are fishing guides? Fishing guide? One. All right.
Oh, yeah.
Only one. Okay. All right. Well, back in 1855, it was the first advertised guided trip to the North Shore, South Shore. In 1855, using Mackinaw boats and bark canoes, North and South Shore. So I was just talking to somebody the other day that was scared to go out in an 18-foot boat on a windy day. This guy was in a bark canoe, didn't he? So you jump to 3 years later and you start to hear reports of people catching fish, right? I mean, they're exploring these different areas, getting up there. Hear from a gentleman at Buchanan, which was the establishment at Knife River. What is Knife River nowadays? Caught upwards of 70 trout in less than 3 hours. He says, not as plentiful as it will be in a month or two. It was all right, it was okay. Yet such a sport above will pay for a trip to Buchanan. So this tells me that they didn't play with their food back in the day, right? I mean, they caught fish and they went in the creel and they took them home. They sold them to people. They ate them. One gentleman took over 200 nice trout in a short while. There it is. There's another report, 1868. We start to see 10 years later, reports they're moving up the shore, starting to explore some new territory. Really all during this time, the fishery had peaked. People were starting to explore, starting to get railroads and roads built up in this neck of the woods, getting more access to these areas. They're targeting lower pools below the First Berry Falls and rocky shoreline of bays. I'm not going to tell you how to fish, but I'll throw some tidbits in here on what to target. There's one. Fishing said to be best in, this was interesting to me, June, July, and August. I don't typically think of coastal brook trout fishing in June, July, and August right now on the North Shore. Typically is really hot and low water. Seasonally large fish, 3 to 4 pounds, up to 6 pounds. Best 4 streams there being Devil Track, Baptism, and Cayman Split Rock. We got a lag here. Whoa. One too far. Can you go back one slide for me? So not long after this era here, you get the 1880s, towards the end, they're already starting to see declines in the fishery. This is 1875. That's just blows my mind. Before we had anything else in Lake Superior, native trout, we'd fish the heck out of these things, right? First concerns about the fishery, the Duluth Sport Club was formed. They actually formed a season, an open season for fishing in 1875, which I thought was kind of cool. I might just have you advance it, yeah. All right, so we jump about 15, what is this, 15 years, 8 years later, something like that. You got accounts of, I can't really tell if this guy had a good day or a bad day, if he was talking about it used to be good, or it is really good still, but the way that they write and everything back in these days is pretty neat. So for more than 20 years, fished the royal streams, nature's own preserves on the north shore of Lake Superior, which, as I first knew them, swarmed with speckled beauties. So that's what they used to call them back in the day, speckled trout. It was a poor half day's fishing, which did not fill the largest creel. Seldom have I waded these streams without bringing into camp a giant trout too large for the creel. So they're talking about these creel baskets, right? You know, at school. 3.5 to 4 pounds in weight. And it wasn't too long after that, you start continually hearing fishery declines. Okay. So, and this was 1889, the first brook trout stocking by the Baptism River Fishing Club. I don't know where those fish came from. I don't know what they were. I could probably do a little research, more research, and find that out. To summarize the rest of the history gets really complex, right? Once you get past the 1900s, a lot of stuff changed. And so, you know, you still had brook trout stocking that was limited in scope and sporadic in where it happened. So people trying to populate populations that had crashed. Extreme habitat degradation. So obviously, you know, they started clear cutting the forest and they're throwing the logs in the river, building check dams, blowing those things out to push them out in Lake Superior and take them to the lumber mills in Duluth and Ashland. I think they would take them across the big lake into a mill in Ashland on big rafts. This was about the time non-natives got introduced, so late 1800s, steelhead. Moving forward, obviously we got brook trout stocking still going on throughout the mid 1900s. This is probably the biggest impact for the entire fish community by far was when sea lamprey showed up. So they wiped out our top level predator, like Cory said. That completely changes the dynamic of everything in the big lake, including and that influenced the streams as well. So all the stuff that was there that we introduced did really well when there was no lake trout to eat them. And I'm sure that the brook trout took a hit during this time as well, just from competition and everything else. Moving forward, so we get into like the 1990s, which doesn't seem like that long ago. I mean, I was like 4 years old, but brook trout management plans started to come on board. So we had our lake-wide management plans get started. We had internally Lake Superior management plan with Minnesota DNR. Over time, we started to see progress with our rehabilitation, albeit kind of slow progress in it. And like Cory said, we got lake trout back. So it'll be interesting to see the next 100 years, now that lake trout are back, and see how the fish community is gonna respond. Go ahead. All right, our goals and objectives for our management plan is it mimics the lake-wide management plan that I mentioned before. So real quickly, you know, our objectives for brook trout are largely based around coastal brook trout. We like those trophy brook trout, you know, all the anglers, everybody loves these big fish, so do we, in the below barrier reaches. We work with partners like TU, y'all do an amazing job at habitat restoration and promoting stream function, coordinating with other agencies on research, working with Grand Portage Band of Chippewa. There's currently 2, correct me if I'm wrong, Cory, but there's 2 brook trout, 2 places that are stocking brook trout in Lake Superior right now, Red Cliff and out of Bayfield, Wisconsin, and Grand Portage just north of us that have brook trout strains, not including splake and stuff. So, so we want to know, we want to monitor those stockings to see if those fish are coming into our waters, because it can influence how we evaluate like different regulations and how the status of the fishery is doing. We want to keep tabs on that. And then investigate the feasibility of adopting a protocol from the Lake Superior Tech Committee for coastal brook trout that is shoreline electrofishing in the lake. I'll talk some more about that as well. Yeah, that worked well. Okay. Yeah, so Minnesota, as you know, is a lot different than a lot of the other areas around Lake Superior. We've got short stream reaches, waterfall barriers. It's kind of nice because our, the trout don't probably prefer to be able to go a lot farther, right? But for us as an agency trying to monitor these populations, it provides a nice little break wall there where we can say, yep, this is coaster habitat, this is not. And a lot of our questions and things moving forward is all, you know, has been really informative because we have those barriers. So the posted boundaries that you might be aware of, those are put in place mostly for coaster brook trout. You know, those things are to protect those bigger fish below barriers like this. Like this brookie. I gotta brag about that one. I actually caught that one. That was pretty good. Yeah, on a random Wednesday afternoon in late September.
What stream?
I'll tell you, it was in the middle shore, okay? And then we have closed seasons, obviously, that protect some of these spawners in the fall, or what we think protect the spawners in the fall. Early September that closes on Labor Day, which is earlier than the inland trout opener. So how do we monitor these things? We've got a number of different ways. By and large, we use our stream electrofishing survey. So this is something that us as Minnesota DNR, because we have barriers, we can be really, we're one of the only ones in the lake that do this in the fall to monitor fall spawning fish. Obviously, this was 2021 or something. But that's September through November. We're on the streams. As soon as I get back to Duluth, I've got about a week, and then we're going to be going. We're going to be going up the shore, and pretty much now till ice comes, we're going to be on rivers trying to see what's in there. And so we also use this shoreline electrofishing. Is that a pointer? Yeah. Shoreline electrofishing. So that's a boat electrofisher that we take out into the lake, targeting shallow water areas. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We're not the only ones doing this. This was a tech committee protocol survey that they'd come up with to get everybody doing the same thing around the lake. And then angling, I convinced Cory to let me angle during work a little bit. Not as much as I want to, but and for the Coaster Genetics Project using volunteers, is anybody in the room volunteer with the Coaster Genetics? 2, we got to change that tonight. I brought the stuff with, so if you're going up to the North Shore quite a bit this fall, talk to me and we'll see if we can get you set up with some stuff to help us learn some things about these coasters. So, and we also have a limited catch at the Knife River Fish Trap. It's mostly targeting steelhead in the springtime, but we do operate it in the fall, and we'll catch a number of fish, brook trout that'll run the Knife River. Go ahead. So I'm going to talk about what we've learned from each one of these. I'll start with our fall spawning assessments in the rivers. So back in the day, before my time at Lake Superior, 97 through 2013, we used to just blanket the shore. We did 29 rivers, try to get to every single one, which was great. It's kind of one of those things that over time we kind of figured out where brook trout are going to be caught, what rivers are more conducive to potential supporting coaster brook trout populations, and we modified that protocol to just 12 rivers. That was starting in 2018 that are from the Gooseberry north. Go ahead.
Where is the gooseberry? Roughly?
The Gooseberry is just north of Two Harbors, so probably that's the somewhere in there. Yeah, so what we do here is the last management plan, we updated this. We used to do it every 5 years. Now we do it every 3. We thought that we need to increase our frequency a little bit on when we're there because these fish don't live to be that old. So being able to get some recaptures from previous surveys might be informative for us. We backpack electrofishing. So we're in the streams, wading, tripping, falling, getting wet, and killing my knees. I'm getting a little bit too old for this. It seems like a young man's game with this, and I don't feel young anymore, but we'll get through. And then hitting these 12 index stations, our goal is to hit each one of them twice, or at least twice, maybe up to 3 times throughout the period of September through ice or November. So the thought was, you know, we can go to every river once and learn a little bit, or we can go to some targeted rivers, hit them multiple times, learn more about run timing, population sizes, all this kind of thing. So we collect a whole bunch of data from these fish, the basic stuff on lengths, weights, looking at growth and age and all this. We started collecting genetics for some of the stuff I'll talk about today. So fin clip, that's part of the coaster genetics project, is taking a small fin clip from the fish. We can learn so much from just a little piece of fin. It's incredible. We can also use a little piece of fin to look at stable isotopes, which is basically the feeding ecology of them. Where have you been eating? Have you been eating in Lake Superior, or have you been eating in the stream? And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. It's also a mark for recaps and used as population estimates and things. Go ahead. I'm not going to get into this, but just know that we've got a lot of data that gets collected and analyzed throughout this process, from population dynamics, population structure, fish community compositions, habitat, obviously the genetics and feed ecology that I just talked about. So here's some of the results from our previous assessment. So this is all of our surveys combined everywhere we've been. Mean catch per unit effort, which is a relative index of abundance. And it's sorted from Duluth to Canada. So over all these surveys we've done since 1997, you can kind of see where these coasters are. Make notes if you need to, okay? Some of these coasters are concentrated, and it's typically in the upper, middle and upper shore. And it also is very concentrated on streams that tend to have a robust brook trout population above the barrier. So more brook trout above generally equates to more brook trout below. One thing I'd say about that is, well, number one, our abundance metric for all rivers, I mean, it's highly variable between the rivers that we go to. It's going to be, if you're out there fishing for coasters and you think you're going to go to one of these rivers and find that many fish, you might not. But if you go back next week, you might, or the next week, you might. So this is one of those fisheries that, little tip for fishing, is just kind of it's one of those games where if the timing's right, they'll be there. Important thing here is a lot of these populations, we know where these big brook trout exist. We can't sample them very well. That was part of the reason why we started the coaster genetics project. We're saying, I can't sample that big terminal pool. I know they're in there. I sampled whole mile river until I got here, and I'm like, that's where they are. We started fishing for them, caught them. Anglers are out there all the time. Let's partner up and collect some data, right? So yeah, some of these important rivers aren't in the coaster assessment per se, but that's why we've utilized anglers for some of our, just to get a better handle on, size structure of, yep, go ahead. Maximum size structure and genetics and things. This is just a comparison of, this is overall relative abundance by survey year. And in the gray bars, you can see all sizes of brook trout over time. And the black bars being brook trout greater than 12 inches. So relatively decent sized brook trouts. Putting all the data, the 29 rivers everywhere we've been and every year together, this is what you see. And, you generally say that, the population's it seems like it's increasing over time. We put on some regulations, a 20-inch minimum regulation back in 2006. I'm glad Cory's here, I can't remember all this stuff. 2006, and so we're monitoring this progress with size structure and how these populations are doing after this regulation. It appears that, you know, the trajectory is relatively up. I mean, we're seeing a lot more brook trout. We're seeing a few more large brook trout. Let's see, go ahead and hit that again. And then if you reevaluate and only include the rivers that are in our 12 index stations over time, because we have such variability in rivers that are good, rivers that are bad, getting to the streams that are priorities, it seems relatively stable, which is good. I mean, we're not seeing a declining trend. This says increasing, this says stable. As far as big fish go, a little bit of an improvement in the last couple of surveys, but nothing off the chart. So just an example there of, you know, moving forward, I think this, and personally from my own personal fishing experience, I think this is more reflective of what's going on. I think they're maintaining what they always have been. And we'll continue to monitor this over time and see if I'm right or not. So here's if abundance is increasing. So basically we'll say we've got, how many people in here have been creeled by a creel clerk on the North Shore steelhead fishing in the spring? Oh, decent number. Got to get after those creel clerks a little bit. There's but anyways, we ask you what you caught, any species, any size, and I can estimate the number of brook trout that are caught in the spring season. And it was really interesting that, go ahead and click that for me. You know, this kind of corroborates what we see with the fall electrofishing. It's, you know, upwards of over 1,000 brook trout caught in the springtime. What are those fish doing there? Probably eating steelhead eggs, right? Caught fishing around steelhead. It was just interesting to see that, you know, at least another survey that we've got kind of supports that, well, there's a decent amount of brook trout still around. All right, spawn run timing. So we're out there every week for the next month and a half. When do we typically see coasters entering the rivers? More than not, tends to be late in the season. You know, the second, third week of October, those water temps start to come down. We probably get a little bit more of the Lake Superior fall weather, that a little bit of rain, rivers come up a little bit, and those fish come in. But prior to September, generally we don't catch much, and that's largely driven probably by water temp. Go ahead and hit that one more time for me. Oh, I gotta touch on this one first. So an interesting thing that I've noticed over time is you don't catch a lot of coasters early, but you see tons of these things around, pink salmon, right? They're in the river spawning like mad. If you compare, go ahead and hit the button one more time for me. If you compare the spawn run timing here to what we typically see in the above barrier reaches, that spawning, I need to throw together some more data on this to really test this, but from my observations, it seems like it's earlier than later. And part of me really questions that pink salmon impact on brook trout spawning, on whether or not they're influencing that. You think about those little critters, they're like little rats all over the place, right? And those little brook trout, they're good at avoiding the big guys because they're agile and quick. These guys are pretty quick too, quicker than anything else, and they're largely abundant, spawning in the same places brook trout will. And that being said, we have caught coasters below the barrier that are chocked full of their eggs early in the season. So there's also that supplemental resources coming into the river, providing some food for them. It's highly nutritious. Go ahead and hit that for me. And on the water temperature, you know, typically it's kind of reverse of what you see in spring, right? So as the fall progresses, the water temperature comes down, probably water levels come up, and those fish tend to run. We catch more later in the year. Some of those big fish you've seen in those photos, we were almost breaking ice, and those things were in there. You can't target them right now based on the regulations at that time of year. Just as a reminder. But you will catch them if you're fishing for salmon, okay? Well, you can come out and help, yeah. Yeah, come on in. Yeah, go ahead. Now, if we look at the age and size distribution, I mean, it's kind of standard what you see in some of our stream resident populations, and what we know about brook trout, they don't live very long. By and large, what we catch, even in these fall coaster assessments, are small fish. I mean, they're sub 12 inches. Very few of these fish that we capture anyway are getting out to these larger sizes. The age is a little bit, I think we underestimate some of these older ages with brook trout. I think lake-wide, that's the case. In a big lake like Lake Superior, I think some of these fish get older than that. And I've got an example of that. Oh, it worked. And one thing I hear a lot is Minnesota needs to get a 22-inch reg like Ontario, right? Based on what we see here, a 22-inch reg would do little to nothing. I mean, you could make it, you might as well make it 100. There's very few fish that get out there. The harvest on those fish is, you might hear of one or two now and then, but they're rare. I always call it like they're chasing unicorns here, you know. To find a big one it's not easy. So I just wanted to. All right, get a picture of a fish up here so we can. We got, I mentioned the aging is a little bit, you know, tricky with scales. Don't know the maximum age. This was just a tag report. So back starting in like 2018, when I started the coaster survey, we started tagging. Actually, I think it was 2021. We started tagging everything that was 200 millimeters or bigger with a Floyd tag. And it's been really interesting to see all these tag returns, reports from anglers. They're reporting these things getting caught in different places around the shore. They move. Some of them move a long ways. Some of them get caught multiple times in the same hole. And so it's been interesting to see that. This is a really cool example of the coaster life history strategy right here. So in this picture are two brook trout. And you can see they both have a Floyd tag in their back with a number on it. This one, you can actually see it's got a little bit of a fin clip regrowth from where we sampled the genetics on that fish. We tagged that fish in Grand Marais Harbor. This fish next to it has a tag, and that tag is from the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources in Canada. So I get this picture from an avid angler, call our counterparts up in Canada and say, you know, his name's Kyle Stratton, who does the coaster brook trout stuff up there, really gung-ho young guy, younger than me. But Kyle, this fish was originally tagged by an angler for their volunteer angler program. They actually let anglers tag fish up there. And is it Jack Pine River? Jackfish River.
Could be either.
Okay, we'll call it the Jackfish River up here, okay? So it was tagged up there 4 years prior, and it was 14.5 inches long. So that fish was subsequently recapped 4 years later in Grand Marais Harbor. And considering the age, you know, these fish are probably older than we think. That 14.5 inch brook trout, when it was originally tagged, was probably 3. So it had to be at least 7, that brook trout. The tagging is giving us important information for longevity and stuff. And then this is really cool because the angler says, you know, I was catching these things and they've got a red. I think they're on a red spawning. I was like, okay, send me a picture. I'm like, holy smokes, that looks like a red, right? And so we don't know for sure if this is going on. We're going to go out in a few weeks and check this out and see. We're going to electrofish in Grand Marais Harbor and see if we can find any fish that appear to be doing something out here. And this would be very interesting if this is happening, because we've never, to my knowledge, documented this happening in Minnesota waters. We assume that it probably does happen in some places, but it's a lot of shoreline to look for, right? So stay tuned for that, hopefully in a few weeks. And I will say those fish in that last slide were caught late in the year. So ice was getting ready to form. Those fish were in the lake trying to do something. So this is what we're going to be doing in a couple of weeks. Moving on to the next survey that we do. It's a shoreline electrofishing survey in cooperation with the Grand Portage Band. So they provide the boat. I wish we had our own boat. We tried to get one this year and we didn't get the money for it. But we partner up with these guys, and when we can do it, June and July, go out and electrofish shoreline areas in different transects, 1 kilometer transects, and yeah, capture and tag and do a bunch of stuff with coasters that we find there, as well as other salmonids like koa salmon and rainbow trout, brown trout. So basically, this is a lake-wide effort to monitor the growth rates and compare the in-lake populations around the big lake. This is a little bit on the methods. It's very similar to what we do in our stream surveys. I won't spend a lot of time on it. One little difference that we do here is the last 2 years I've been doing gastric lavage, which is basically take a pump and you guys probably, if you're fly fishermen, you know, you got the little tube you stick in there and see what kind of bugs they're eating. Well, this is just a souped up thing. It doesn't hurt them. But we've been puking them to see what they're eating. I brought the samples from the last 2 years on the back table. So just try to keep them in order by number if you can. It doesn't matter, but they're labeled up and everything. But just take a look at the diversity in the diets. All those fish were puked from Grand Marais Harbor. A couple of the things that you will find, I'm pretty sure there's a few Bucks hardware leeches in there. They're too big of leeches to be from the lake. I don't know. All right, go ahead. Yep. And I'm not going to touch on anything of this. We'll skip over this, but this is basically everything that we're doing within the shoreline electrofishing assessment, same as in the near shore stuff. Here's some of the results of our catches. I don't have 2024 in here, but just know that I think we were in Grand Marais and Tack Harbor this spring, and I think in total we ended with like 31 brook trout. So it was very similar to previous years, except for Taconite Harbor. We didn't find any in there. Because that night there was a huge masses of smelt that are about this big. And I'm certain those fish were just hammering those smelt right offshore where we couldn't get to them. We used our sonar and everything, and you could really see those big marks all over the place around this ball of smelt. So I'm sure they're taking advantage of it. But overall, the largest known populations that we have found in where we have looked is in Grand Marais Harbor and Taconite Harbor. If you compare this to some other places around the lake, so some other really good coaster fisheries, Nipigon Bay, Ontario, Grand Portage, where they stock brook trout, and Tobin Harbor at Isle Royal, pretty much, you know, at least Taconite Harbor and Grand Marais, these don't have the most recent years in here, but it's similar. I mean, we're right there in at least these two populations being similar to some world-class fisheries. So it's pretty neat to find those. And moving forward, go ahead. what I really want to know moving forward is where else in our shoreline might there be little populations like this? We don't have a lot of bays and harbors. We've hit most of them over time. We'd like to get back to more of them, but it's all a time thing in their boat and trying to coordinate all that. But we've got a guy out of Duluth that does remote sensing, and he is basically mapping the entire shoreline of Minnesota waters, Lake Superior. And we'll be able to, I'm excited to sit down at the table with him and start to work with him on, okay, here's where we've caught coasters. Where else, what else did you find that looks like that? And then we can go explore those areas and see if any exist there or not. All right, size distributions for our in-lake sampling. Tend to catch a decent number of larger fish. But overall, go ahead and click it again. Overall, we find a lot of small fish out here in Lake Superior. I mean, look at that little guy. So if you're basing coasters off size, I mean, this was caught in the lake. That's a coaster brook trout. He's that big. So a lot of variability. Here's a couple beauties that we got this spring. Those are tagged. This fish was about as fat as you could imagine on a trout. You could barely even hold the tail on that thing. It was so round. It's like a football. So they're eating good. And this is just a summary of the recaptures that we get among years. So we haven't captured a lot of recaptures over time from what we see in the shoreline sampling. But when we do, they're typically where we caught them. So Grand Marais Harbor. We did have a tagged fish from Taconite Harbor that I caught up in the Devil Track during a stream assessment. The fish went all the way up there. Many of these fish have been caught south of Grand Marais in the Cascade River, some of the smaller rivers south of there. So they get around for sure. And multiple recaptured by anglers, in our stream surveys throughout the summer and fall. Go ahead. We're looking for stocked and clipped brook trout, right? To make sure that those clipped brook trout or stocked fish aren't impacting our view of what the fishery, how the fishery is progressing, right? So very low numbers of stocked brook trout and splake that we have identified. So there's about 4% of all the samples we've captured have been stocked fish. We find some of them are clipped. So we've got 7 that have had adipose clips. If you ever catch them up the shore and they've got an adipose clip, they're either a brook trout or a splake. And then 3 that were splake, that were stocked. This is a splake right here. You can see the fork, slight fork in the tail. Not a lot of coloring on the side. These can be very tricky. How many of you did you see that report of the state record brook trout caught in Lake Superior and all that? I could talk for 10 minutes about that fish, but that was a tricky one. Luckily, we have genetics to write us on that. But so basically, these, if they're a splake, they're coming from Michigan, Wisconsin. There's some thought that maybe some inland lake splake stocking could contribute to some of the splake that we're finding in Grand Marais Harbor. With genetics and stuff we're doing in the future, we might be able to tease that out a little bit. All of them were captured in Grand Marais Harbor, so close to where they were stocked. And those stocked brook trout were likely from Grand Portage. Possible that some unclipped fish were products of stocking. So the Grand Portage randomly stocks fish of all sizes. I don't know if they've changed this protocol, but last time I talked to them, they stock fry, they stock fingerlings, they stock clipped ones, unclipped ones. So it's really hard to say, but our genetics has kind of teased out some of that. Go ahead. Feel like I'm going way over time here. 8:02. You good? Speed it up. Speed it up. All right. Okay. Coaster Brook Trout Genetics Project. Thanks to everybody who was involved with this. Over the last number of years, anglers sampled over 300 brook trout. What's really cool is we're out here electrofishing in the lake here. We're in the streams here, and we got all, which is good to add to our genetic sampling. Go ahead. And just a breakdown of what the volunteer anglers have caught versus Lake Superior. Go ahead and hit it again. So if you put this in perspective, so anglers don't lie about size of fish, right? We all know that. But anglers sampled more 12+ inch brook trout in 6 years than we did in 7 surveys over 3 decades. They're fishing the right spots, right? That we can't effectively get to. They're very important. Angling is very important for understanding the max size and other things. Go ahead. Summarizing all this stuff, coaster populations overall have remained stable. You know, we don't see any real massive declines or anything. We're learning a lot of new things every day. No major changes in age, size, and all that. Minimal catches and impacts from migration of stockfish, which is good. Go ahead. Lake populations do exist, provide trophy angling opportunities. Pay attention. They prefer shorelines and protected harbors with gravel, cobble, and boulder. If you're casting off of a bedrock shelf, there's hardly a fish at all in a lot of those areas. So shoreline spawning populations might exist. Go ahead. And volunteer anglers obviously are very, very good. We'd like to continue with this program to keep this going. And with that, I think I can maybe end with this slide if you want.
I think that's
Yeah.
probably it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead and so what can we do moving forward? A lot of these coaster populations are, you know, from what we understand, we assume that a lot of these fish that are big below are originating from upstream. And so very important, obviously, to protect and enhance habitat above and below the barriers, particularly in above barrier stuff. So Trout Unlimited and you guys, the stuff you're doing above the barriers, you're impacting coaster brook trout when you're doing it on the North Shore. Go ahead. You can click it a couple times if you want. Protect coaster brook trout above and below the barriers. We're already doing a lot of these things that are on this list, right? We've got our 20-inch minimum reg. Monitoring the genetics. We've learned a lot about the genetics over time. I was hoping to get into some of that today. I won't, just for the sake of time, but monitoring stream and lake ecosystem change, climate change. There's Didymo that has showed up on the North Shore, and we've got a group of scientists that are working on that to better understand what impact that would have on the fishery. So been out there with them sampling brook trout all throughout the season. We're just sampling below barriers all throughout the season to maybe understand if that's having an impact or not. And managing to reduce impacts and interactions with non-natives. So particularly in streams managed primarily for brook trout. So it's one of those things that whether it's salmon or steelhead or whatever, you know how much of this competition really matters. Do they fill their own niche, own void? I mean, that's going to be something I think we're going to learn a lot in the next few years. Go ahead. And then lastly, if you think back to some of the what we've done with lake trout rehabilitation and stocking is a tool that you can use to rehabilitate populations in some instances. Given the small population size here, there's a lot into this, but would supplemental stocking of local origin brook trout be something that we could do moving forward without negatively impacting the wild populations? And I think that will be a lot of what we talk about in the next management plan revision.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Before we get into the question and answer period, I need a volunteer. Who's volunteering? No, are you volunteering? Okay, thank you. You volunteer to get a t-shirt. This is our door prize. So you should always volunteer when you win Trout Unlimited because only good things happen. So now we'll get into Q&A. I guess before we do that, let's we'll probably have a round of applause later, but how about a preliminary round of applause for
Thank you.
And we will start with questions from the in-person audience. We got one from John. Meanwhile, the guys that are on Zoom, feel free to put your questions in the chat and we'll get to those soon. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, thanks. Well, Nick, I know you couldn't get, Nick, I know you couldn't get to the genetics much, but I know you've done some initial work there. And the one thing that, for those of you who fish the North Shore a lot and what we know historically is those watersheds have really changed. The below barrier habitat is sort of continues to get blown out. We have high water temperatures, low water. It seems that the conditions, especially in the lower rivers, have changed from what they were 150 years ago. But I know, I think you've done some of the preliminary results of the genetic work. Can shed some light on how much successful reproduction is happening below the barriers. Have you been able to determine? Seems to me, I thought I'd heard that maybe, as far as we know, these fish are coming from above barriers.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. So we set out to understand part of understanding what a coaster is trying to understand where they are produced and how they are produced, where they're coming from. We've analyzed the above and below barrier populations on the North Shore, and we've added to this over time to get an idea of whether or not there's differences above and below barriers. Do we have a population below the barrier that's spawning, creating coasters? We set out to say, so no, we have yet to find any successful reproduction that appears to be happening below the barrier. The easiest way to explain this is you've got a fish from one river and a fish from another river that are in the same river during spawning and create babies. They're genetically unique enough, these populations on the North Shore, to where we can tell. If you gave me a fin clip from a fish you caught in Lake Superior, I could tell you what river it was born in. That's how much we know nowadays with these genetic tools. So these two fish from two separate rivers that are in this river spawning, we have yet to find fish from subsequent generations that are half and half, that appear to be a mix of two different origins, which generally tells you that they look like the above barrier population. They came down at some point, they go back to that river. And the reproduction that's happening below the barrier, even though those two fish from different rivers are at the same place spawning, their offspring aren't coming back to be adults. If you think about it, it makes sense. Look at these below barrier habitat reaches that we have here in the fall. Our shore is not built for fall spawning fish. Like, it's amazing that, at least in the current condition, low water, flashy, those eggs that are deposited in the fall here have to go through a whole winter cycle, survive the spring floods before they can hatch out. And then when they hatch out, they've got a limited amount of space to go before they're in Lake Superior. They're this big and they're likely a snack for somebody, right? Oh, or this big. So that's kind of what we see. I'm not saying there isn't successful spawning going below the barrier, but we have yet to find it with all the genetics data that we found, or we've analyzed so far.
Brad.
So you mentioned the return of lake trout populations. Is that specifically the lean lake trout, or is this looking at any of the other subspecies of lake trout present in Lake Superior, like red fins and humpies?
Go ahead, Cory. Cory's a good one to answer this one. It's Cory Goldsworthy.
Oh, you can talk wherever you want.
So Lake Superior is the only Great Lake that retained any lake trout population post sea lamprey and commercial overharvest. So any lake trout you catch in Lake Superior is comes from a wild progeny or something that was stocked. All the other Great Lakes were wiped out. We retain 4 that we know of, what we call morphotypes or ecotypes. So 4 types of lake trout. We have lean lake trout, Siskiwet lake trout, which are the fatter, deep water form of lake trout. We have red fins and we have humpers. Red fins and humpers are more of those offshore reef, Isle Royale areas, right? And through 1954 till now, 1954, we signed a treaty with, US signed a treaty with Canada, established the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, charged them with killing sea lamprey, which they did. It's annual treatment. It has to happen annually. Otherwise, sea lamprey populations come up. Since we've started treating sea lamprey, we've knocked their populations back 95% from historic highs. They still kill more fish than the commercial and sport fisheries combined. So through that time, though, because Lake Superior had wild lake trout populations existing, all of those populations rebuilt. We also have like river spawning lake trout on in Ontario waters, and pre-sea lamprey, pre-commercial overharvest. There were thoughts that there were upwards of 12+ different morphotypes in Lake Superior. So we've lost a lot, but we've definitely retained at least 4 distinct morphotypes of lake trout. Thank you.
That's why I brought him.
Next question. Bob.
I had a question, Nick. It basically looked like from your original map, the largest section of Lake Superior that has any sort of responsibility on the lake is actually the UP of Michigan. Is that correct? Do they have a similar program to what you're actually talking about? Do they have brook trout? Do they have coasters? Are they doing a similar thing genetically? I don't know what their situation is. I assume that they have much longer stream flows. They don't have barrier falls.
Yep.
You know, I mean, what are they actually seeing that contrasts to what you're seeing with the short streams, you know, genetic influx from above the barrier
Yeah.
falls and all that?
Yep. So some of the stuff we've been doing lake-wide. So some of the genetics work that we do in Minnesota started as a lake-wide project with analyzing a lot of different populations around the Lake Superior Basin to identify coasters. They have identified and also built in some stable isotope analysis, which is, long story short, you are what you eat. Look at the carbon nitrogen signature, and you can tell a coaster brook trout because it'll have a carbon signature that looks like Lake Superior. That's, in my opinion or perspective, has been the best tool that they've had in Michigan, because they don't have those boundaries. We started to utilize those stable isotopes to be able to tell what is a coaster and what is not. And Michigan has been, you know, they've been doing coaster stuff for a long time. You think of the Pilgrim River, and you know, some of those that are known historic large runs of coasters. I don't know, Cory, do you have any input on
for Minnesota, right? I mean, what makes our streams unique and is also our curse is right now the Knife River is running at 7 CFS. The Brule is at 100+. So we have very low flows, clay, bedrock. It's easy for us to get in our rivers in the fall because they're, you know, knee deep or hip deep at best, except for some of those terminal pools. The rivers on the UP of Michigan, you can't backpack electrofish those things because they're big, they're deep, they have water, and the stretches to barriers are miles and miles and miles, right? So very different habitat, very different surveys. They do shoreline electrofishing surveys all around the lake, but just the way that their rivers are is not conducive to what we would consider typical sampling for spawning fish species in the fall.
Yeah. And as far as them doing similar things, so we had a coaster meeting, John was there last fall. It's like I'm calling the Coaster 2.0 or something. And Jake Lemon with Minnesota Trout Unlimited. I think he's with the National TU, right? It's based out of Michigan. You know, he's been trying to get a program like we have in Minnesota. Yeah, I've been talking with him and some of them about doing the same thing in Michigan waters, utilizing anglers to get samples for genetics and isotopes and this kind of stuff. So you all who are part of the Coaster Genetics Project are shifting the management. You're helping because other people are taking notice of it and they're starting to do it too, saying, yeah, we want to know that. So.
Okay, do we have any questions on the Zoom now?
First question is from James. Do you find any coastal brooks from Minnesota in the rural Wisconsin?
I don't know, wouldn't know. Now I'm gonna ask Paul Peascheck actually, because
Again, Wisconsin, the only monitoring that they have is the rural river fish trap camera, right?
Yeah.
So to see whether it's a tank brook trout or brook trout would be, I think it'd be difficult.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, it can happen, but
right.
they're relying on
And-
on a camera system.
And very few is what John says.
Very few brook trout that go through the night weir. Sorry, I know that there's very few brook trout that go through the Brule River weir. Very
Yeah.
few.
And that being said, you see these things traveling all over the lake, so I wouldn't doubt it if some. So some of the genetic stuff that we've found genetically identified fish. One fish in the Cadunce River that we sampled a few years ago was from the Jumbo River in Michigan. Based on genetics, it blocked out right with that. We see splake and stuff coming from, and stock brook trout coming from Red Cliff that show up on occasion, and we've caught them in the Knife River trap before. So I wouldn't doubt if our Minnesota fish show up somewhere else, if they can avoid the lake trout going across the lake.
Okay, we got two more questions from the Zoom. The first question, which I will answer, is whether the video is being recorded and whether folks can also get a copy of Nick's presentation. And the answers are yes and yes. We'll send out an email to everybody who signed up for this with the link to the recording and also to the presentation, which has that fancy chart which shows which rivers have the most coasters. So all of you who took photographs, you'll have something supplemented. Second question is from Dan Owens. He wants to know if there's any coasters in the Nemaji system, and also in terms of coloration. Some of the lake run browns, for instance, are much more silvery. Any distinct coloration difference between coasters and resident brook trout?
On the color aspect, I think I think they're similar to what you see with steelhead. If they're freshly in the river, I think we see some that are very shiny, right? And you're like, oh yeah, that fish has been in the lake. Typically they're pretty thick, bigger. But yeah, we see that coloration difference just like you do with other species. I'm sure if they're in the river longer, they kind of dull out like most of them do. But the Nemaji River Basin, we've never documented. We haven't really looked, to be honest. We know that there's some really great populations of brook trout in the Nemaji River Basin, and whether or not they can avoid all the mostly walleyes and muskies and stuff that can be eaten to go up there, we don't know. I've had that on my mind though, and I've asked the same question to some other people.
Okay, good. You're getting a question. That's stimulating your thinking. Are there any more questions from people here at the Wild Boar?
Just one quick one. So we supported the regulation change for above barrier from 10 down to 5. And I'm just wondering what you think about, there's been more research about the tendency. Brook trout are not known for being really tending to go to the lake or the ocean, but we just wonder if that sort of the density dependent factor, larger populations upriver tend to increase the tendency for some fish to migrate down to the lake. Is there any research on that you aware of or thoughts on that?
Cory wants, he's antsy over there. Let Cory hold this one.
Yeah, so historically, think pre-settlement times, right? All of the North Shore streams were choked with cedars. You couldn't get a canoe of them, right? You look at what they are now, they're wide, not a lot of riparian area. I've always thought that those streams were cold from the mouth all the way up to the headwaters back then. You take the forest away, reroute the rivers, they warm up. 1922, a biologist by the name of Thaddeus Serber did a survey on the tributaries of the North Shore. And this was post-logging. And he said, the rivers have warmed up so much because of no trees, sunlight, burnt out bogs that were where the cold water was. The management action at that time was to stock brown trout and smallmouth bass because that's all that could survive, right? Luckily, the streams and the forests have shown their resilience. We've rebuilt back a lot of those populations, those brook trout populations. So I don't want to say I'm convinced because I'm hardly ever convinced of things, but sourcing population dynamics. You have great habitat upstream. Those populations are high. You only have limited habitat. Whatever additional fish is through has to go somewhere. They go downstream and look. They go downstream and look. They hit Lake Superior. They go, I got habitat. I got food. I'm going to grow 24 inches. So you read about those early accounts of, before everything habitat was really degraded. They're catching 200 fish at the mouth of the Knife River. Yeah. Sourcing population dynamics. What did the brook trout population look like in the river all the way up to the headwaters? So you're building those lake populations based on the river population. So we've been focused really a lot in the last 30 years on the lake. Let's stock the lake. Let's look at the lake. This is where coasters come from. We need to do a 180 and look at our watersheds and go, if we want more big brook trout in Lake Superior, we need to get better habitat, colder water in the watersheds.
Okay, thank you. Any final questions? The biggest brook trout that I have ever caught is 12 inches.
You said you don't come to the North Shore.
I don't come to the North Shore. That brook trout was actually in the Black Hoof River, which is that a tributary of the Nemaji or? Yes.
It is. I didn't want to name drop that one, but you
Yeah.
did for me. So.
I was steelhead fishing. The only time I've been steelhead fishing, I didn't get any steelhead, but that was a very nice consolation prize. So anyway, I think there are probably a lot of folks in this room who not only want to catch bigger brook trout, but also are just really excited by the idea that we can restore a population of brook trout that some of whom can grow to monster size in our monster lake. So we really want to thank Cory and Nick for coming all the way down from Duluth to talk with us, and let's give them another round of applause.